Well, folks, it's 12:05, so we'll go ahead and kick this call off. My name is Joe Dunn. I work for a company called Markham. Um, I'm just going to throw out some quick ground rules for this call. So this is a Skype call that's being recorded. We're going to post it on our YouTube channel later, just for posterity and capturing all this great knowledge. If there's any sort of audio issues that come up, especially if you have kind of a loud microphone, I might mute you. I'm sorry in advance for that, but just kind of the way it goes. Um, and I think that's all I have. I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Parker with Island County to kind of give a little bit of an introduction about the group.
Joe, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Yep, loud and clear.
So I'd like to thank everybody for joining the call. We've been doing these SharePoint group meetings for a little over 2 years now. And the idea behind this group was essentially a place where city, county, state agencies, and even other states and federal government agencies to kind of and network with each other and basically talk about all things Office 365 and SharePoint related issues. We've been doing biannual, twice a year meetings where we would essentially go to like either the city of Bellevue and meet in person. Last time around, actually, we met in city of Redmond and did a presentation there. And we also do these Skype sessions where it's sometimes more convenient for everybody just to on their lunch break or after hours to watch a presentation. Let me mute my phone here. So once again, thanks everybody for coming along. Today we've got Nintex on the board, and they're going to show us essentially a potential replacement for InfoPath and to this one. So thanks again for joining.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. And with that, I think we'll hand it over to Steve.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jeff. Just a quick audio check. Everybody hear me okay?
You sound great.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I thought I'd start with a quick introduction. Again, today's topic is life after InfoPath, modern eForms in and around SharePoint. Sorry about that. I hit the button to advance my slide and it muted me. So we're off to a good start. All right. Yeah, so today we're going to go through a quick overview, a little bit about me, status of InfoPath, a quick update on where that is. We're going to talk about an overall approach to forms, why InfoPath was kind of phased out, what Microsoft has to replace it, and what Nintex can bring to the table, and really look at these areas around public-facing forms, mobile forms, SharePoint list forms, and workflow task forms. And we'll even touch on surveys and other things like that, time permits. I do want to spend some time spend some time hands-on, just don't want to kill you with PowerPoint. Talk a little bit about Power Apps and some other Microsoft complementing technologies like Microsoft Forms and, again, Power Apps, and we'll wrap up with some questions at the end. So, again, quickly about me, I've got, I'll say, a web development marketing background. Began working with Microsoft Web Technologies back in '99, which is completely different than where we are today. This was merchant server and commerce server and things like that. Basically building websites on the Microsoft stack, and then when Microsoft merged it with content management server, merged it with this thing called the SharePoint server. Started using that. So I've been using SharePoint basically since it was released. And I used to say all this because I thought it made me sound cool. Now I think it makes me sound a little bit old. But I've been, again, working with SharePoint from the beginning. I was a SharePoint consultant back since MOS was released, and worked in all sorts of aspects, working with SharePoint in radio, aerospace. I worked for a company that sold teddy bears, Boyd's Bears, for a period of time. And then, again, the last 5 years, heavily focused on government and government customers. I came to Nintex about 5 years ago from the consulting world, and part of the reason was I was using Nintex so heavily in all my customer engagements that I really liked the people, really liked the technology and what it could do. So when an opportunity opened, I jumped at it. Should also mention that my SharePoint user group, or my home user group, was originally like the Richmond user group back in Richmond, Virginia, or the Reston user group in Reston, Northern Virginia. So moved to the Seattle area about a year and a half ago. Nintex is headquartered in Bellevue, so we've been here about 18 months. So I'm kind of excited to talk to you all and get exposure to another SharePoint user group. And most importantly, I'm not a coder. I do not. I can't write code. I think the last time I touched code, classic ASP, which is called ASP. So again, I can dabble in some things, but again, what we're going to focus on today too is talking about forms and really look at citizen development around forms. All right, so let's talk about InfoPath and what happened. If you look back to 2013 when Microsoft made that famous announcement, or 2014, that they were going to deprecating InfoPath in 2013 was going to be the last version of that they were going to offer. Slight panic ensued for sure, and they actually had the SharePoint conference shortly after that, and they did a presentation. They didn't allow a lot of insights into what their roadmap was, and good for us because they actually, they talked about Nintex as they're probably a viable alternative for InfoPath as people were moving off of it. And again, like I said, at the time, slight panic ensued. There was going to be no future versions. 2013 was going to be the last, and there was no clear replacement. Now, at the time, Microsoft talked about it was kind of in skunkworks at the time, something that was codenamed Fossil or Forms on SharePoint List, but that actually was killed before it ever made its way to market. And that was thought it was going to be a way to deal with it. The other thing is they recommended using some of the other Office technologies for forms. So using Excel, using Word, using Access to do kind of structured documents and things, which is what InfoPath did. So. And again, they didn't provide any type of migration path. So where we are today, maybe softened a little bit from that initial shock that everybody had back in 2014. They're supporting the 2013 version longer than they originally planned. I think at the time they were going to go to 2023, right? They're going to give it 10 years or so. Now they're extending it out. They're actually even supporting it in SharePoint Server 2016, because I think at the time they made the announcement, there was no plans to support it in what at the time was called, again, SharePoint vNext, which was 2016, and it's still being supported. So, and I'll include a link with all this presentation at the end if you want to find out what the latest and greatest is about InfoPath and how long it's going to be supported. But 2013 is the last version, and it's it's still kind of limping along out there. But what we see here at Nintex is any type of migration happens, whether it be an on-premise migration from 2013 to 2016 to 2019, or migrating to SharePoint Online, somewhere in there it's time to take an inventory of your InfoPath forms and look at getting off of that, since it is kind of a burning platform at this point. So why did this all happen? I'd like to talk a little bit, give a little bit of a background on this, because it helped me, since I remember using InfoPath when it was a smart client. Matter of fact, everything that Microsoft did in 2003 was about smart clients. So you needed a CAL for Office in 2003 to both build a form and to fill it out, right? So it was, and everything they were doing was this idea of a smart client. It could be web enabled, but it was going to live on the desktop as a client. And then as things evolved, you had this idea of a form server, right? So now we want to take these off of the client and move them into some server technology. So form server 2007, again, that was tied in and coupled with SharePoint. And then ultimately in later versions, you had SharePoint InfoPath form services. See if I have a graphic on that one. Yeah. So that's kind of the evolution of all of that. But ultimately, what InfoPath was from the beginning and what it remains to this day. Here, oops. I have a cool animation I like to show. So what it isn't is it's not cloud first, mobile first, right? So everything back then as a client and then making its way to SharePoint, it was still, there's no real idea of cloud way back then, or not heavily used. And then the idea of even mobile was not quite as robust with the the devices that we have today. So it didn't really support Microsoft's strategy, which is part of the reason they killed it. It was just too hard of a technology to update. It's not mobile. It wasn't great in the cloud, and it wasn't really easy to use for everyone. As there's a certain skill set in there for InfoPath developers that you would use that maybe your average information worker wouldn't use. So the way I look at it, if you look at the tools that Microsoft provided, you had InfoPath Designer, you had SharePoint Designer, all client-side designers that were going to SharePoint, and you're building out your applications. Now with essentially both of these technologies, both InfoPath and SharePoint Designer being deprecated, we have organizations again looking for replacements. And why is that? And, what InfoPath was really good at, and you look at kind of the structure of all of it, it was a really good structured document, right? It had everything was built into that XML file that you could ultimately put in a form library, right? So it had, had all your rules built into it. You could actually build and code workflow into it. You had this idea of code behind. You put it all together, and you could put it into a form library. But what it wasn't really good at is, unless you were doing that custom coding, it couldn't really just sit on top of an existing process. And we here at Nintex used InfoPath originally to be the forms element to our workflow, right? So Nintex as the kind of preeminent workflow and forms tool for SharePoint, we started in the workflow space, and we originally supported InfoPath to be the UI for the process, but because it really wasn't super workflow aware, you didn't have the idea of the workflow context in there. It really people started then use it as that standalone app where they would actually build all the logic for the workflow into the form. That just didn't scale really well. It was really hard to maintain and update. But again, people have tons of these out there, and they were viable solutions at the time. But now that technology's advanced and Microsoft's gone in a different direction, looking for a replacement. And that's where Nintex comes in, because what we do is approach it a little bit differently. Our approach to forms is we like to say no form is an island, right? You don't have a form that exists by itself. Typically, you don't fill out a form and then take it to your boss and then it sits on their desk, right? They do something. It's part of a process. So what we do is we take that idea of having to have it all in one with the workflow and everything built right into a single structured document that could live in a file library or a document library that was a content type of forms, and now we break it apart so that we use forms as the user interface to the process, and we overcome that kind of the hurdle that InfoPath had, which is we make it we make it aware of the workflow context, so that when you fill out a form, you're presented with one view. When it goes to finance and they need to provide information, maybe they get a different view and they provide different information. So we don't have to do everything in one form, right? That was always one of the challenges with InfoPath was, you had to have all your different views kind of baked into the one form, right? Here's the person who's going to do the form, and then we need the person who's going to review it or add something to it. They have different views, and we had to do that all in the form. So again, what Nintex allows you to do is work inside of SharePoint. We can quickly and easily build the forms out. We don't need a client to do it. It's all going to live inside of, it's either going to live inside of SharePoint or what we're going to talk about today is even our cloud product that's independent of SharePoint. You're going to build it out in the browser, right? And then the idea is we're going to be able to make those forms easily accessible to anyone on any device, anywhere they happen to be. And that includes the ability to do some offline capabilities if you have a situation that calls for it, which is a powerful kind of aspect of our mobile technology, right? Where you wanted to build something and take it remotely, you can do that. And then lastly, again, the big thing for us is it's going to always have something to do with a workflow in some fashion. All right, so I mentioned we want to go through all of these, kind of talk through these different scenarios, right? Because there's a lot, right? Different things, and this is not I'm not trying to say that Nintex is a one size fits all for every form need that you might have, or every InfoPath scenario that you might have. There's forms as a pretty broad, eForms is a pretty broad category. But when you look at things like public-facing forms, we'll talk about some of the technology we have there to build anonymous forms and put them on your website. The ability to build mobile forms, whether that be mobile browser-based forms that are responsive, or build forms that are surfaced in a mobile app that are available to authenticated users within your organization. We'll talk about easily changing the default list forms in SharePoint and building forms that maybe there's not a workflow behind it, or maybe it's part of a workflow, but the workflow runs on a different list. But you want to have a more elegant design experience for someone entering items and maybe even putting rules and validation in there. Workflow task forms, we'll talk about that too. Again, when you're assigning people things to do in a process, that's their user experience, right? And it's not just, hey, I'm going to check, approve, or reject on this acquisition workflow, but maybe I need to provide, I need to upload supporting material, or maybe I need to provide account information, maybe I need to provide other info. So that controlling that user experience is an important part of what we do and how forms fits in with workflow. Again, we'll talk. Again, I don't want to ignore the fact that Microsoft is they have a technology out there called Power Apps that is a solution that they have that provides some capabilities like InfoPath has, and we'll touch on that a little bit. I work for Nintex, so everything I do is with Nintex, but Power Apps is a viable platform, and it does some things that Nintex doesn't do. So we'll touch on that. And again, surveys. I don't think we're going to have time to get into the SharePoint forms, but Microsoft has a forms tool that's really about doing surveys and interaction and things like that, but don't kind of fit into the building out a process or building out an app type of thing. So, all right. So this is where I want to jump in. I will pause there since I've been talking for about 10 minutes, see if there's any questions, comments, or if not, I'm just going to keep going. All right. Okay, so we're going to start here. I'm going to show you kind of an end product, and then we'll go through and show you how we built it. So again, I'm going to jump around a little bit. I should mention we're going to look at a couple of different products that we have. Again, Nintex has been around with SharePoint since 2007. So we have on-premises versions of our software to go all the way back to 2007 and all the way to the current version of 2019, and we'll continue to support that going forward. There's a significant portion, more than half of our customers are still using the on-premises version of SharePoint and the on-premises version of Nintex. So we'll touch on that a little bit. We will also have a product for O365 in SharePoint Online that lives in the cloud as part of that provider-hosted app framework. It's actually the most downloaded app in the SharePoint Online store. We have that. I'm not going to go into that too much because there's a lot of overlap with both our cloud product and our on-premise product. And then I'm also going to show what we call Nintex Workflow Cloud. And it's a lot of the same capabilities that you see within our on-prem product and our Office 365 product, but it's divorced from SharePoint. So you can use it for other things. And one of the things you can use it for is building some public-facing forms that may interact with other systems, not just SharePoint, right? So in the example we have here, and hopefully you're seeing our cool fictional county website called Harrington County. I don't know where Harrington County actually exists because it's fictional, but you can see it's a beach bedroom type community. And then here under How Do I have a number of different public-facing forms that I would make available to citizens in my community. Right. I actually have one that was available to employees in this pension program enrollment form. And what I've been doing here, because I feel like this is a compelling use case for a lot of our government customers, is the idea of capturing information for some specific processes that aren't covered by like a point solution, right? Maybe they're not part of any other solution that you have for maybe you don't have a records request solution. Or maybe you don't have a solution that kind of handles these type of processes natively, and you need to fill the gaps with some public-facing forms and workflow. So the one I'm going to start with and show you is one that I had from a customer back on the East Coast, where they came to us and they had SharePoint, but they didn't want to use a lot of it for this particular process. So they had a form, and again, I'll show you the form. And again, their name has been changed to protect the innocent. but this is so I just put the Harrington County name and logo, but all the content on here is exactly off of their form. And what it is a in this particular state, in this county, if you prepay your property tax every year, and then you sell your property before the year is up, you're entitled to a refund. So in order to do a refund, you have to fill out some paperwork. You have to provide a valid government document, a 1098 form, and then you have to provide your driver's license. And then it would go through and it would work with the case management system. It would go through and provide tracking into the 311 system, so if people wanted to get updates. So it integrated with a lot of systems. And in this particular case, this particular county did not necessarily want to use SharePoint for this piece of it. They wanted to use SharePoint for other aspects of it. So it was a great opportunity for us to kind of get into building these types of forms with our Workflow Cloud product. So again, it has full integration and full integration with SharePoint, so we can write this information back into SharePoint lists if we need to. But again, it highlights the ability of building out these public-facing forms quickly and easily without writing code. So you'll see here's the PDF version of that. It's pretty simple. It's got a tax number, a property address, a year of refund, amount of refund. I mean, just pretty basic form. And then ultimately you can get them to sign it or put their information in here. So this is the form that we started with, and again went through, and we have the complete ability to build this same form out just like you're seeing here on this website. We can do this in our SharePoint on-premise product using the designer and something we call Nintex Live, which is the ability to publish on-premises forms out to our Azure and collect data and have it then feedback in your SharePoint list. So we'll talk about how you would do that and approach the same form. And again, the output would look exactly the same. It's just a matter of where that data is going on the back end. So directly in the SharePoint or through Nintex Workflow Cloud back into SharePoint or some other system. So here's our property tax rebate form. Again, you can see it looks very similar, and I did that on purpose to make it look like our PDF form. Okay. And again, I'm wrapping this in here into an iframe. So you can see here I built this out, and it has all the same information on it. You'll notice we put in some masking here on some of these, put in some tool tips here so people know exactly what they're filling out, but it's essentially the same data that we saw right there on the PDF. Now, I already have this in here. You don't need to see me type in all this information. So I put in my information. You can see here, this is going to validate that it's in the proper format. I could actually put rules in here. So if you didn't type in all the digits, it would error out. And I put in the refund amount and the year of the refund, say 2017. Again, using rules, right? Those were one of the things that we always liked about InfoPath, is the idea of building rules. You're going to get that same type of fidelity in Nintex forms. So if I wanted to ship this check to a different address because, hey, I sold my property, this is the property address, but I've since moved, I could put a different address in there. And again, on the form itself, wasn't quite as robust because this PDF is static. So I would have to type it in here. Then I would have to extract it and use it elsewhere. So again, just making it more easy to use for your end user. All right, so I got my email address in there. I'm gonna go ahead and select the file. And again, I can upload a 1098 form. I can upload a driver's license form, or a driver's license. In this case, I'm gonna intentionally omit the driver's license and go ahead and do the 1098 form. I do that on purpose just because we're going to go in and circulate this for review and approval, and then when it's we can reject it and send it back to the citizen, and that just highlights that workflow task form, just at a really high level workflow task form that we would have that then you can build out using our forms builder. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. Now this does do a little bit of a wet signature. Now I'm doing this with my mouse, so not super elegant. But if I was on a touch device, this would work much better. And this is just a wet signature. If you needed to have a more compliant e-signature solution, you could do that in the workflow using something like we now have Nintex Sign, which is our sign product, which is backed by Adobe Sign. So you could actually send out a document for them to sign off on. But here, this wet signature is sufficient enough for what we need to do. I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. So let's go ahead and look at how we built out that form while it's running, and then I'll show you we'll jump in and look at the task forms, and we'll talk about mobile as well. Okay. So here we are again. I mentioned this is the Workflow Cloud product, which is great for building public-facing forms. You'll see here, and again, the big thing here is, again, it works with SharePoint, but it doesn't rely on the SharePoint workflow engine, right? Which, again, as a public-facing form designer, that's great because we can just build it out and then have it published back into SharePoint. Or if it needs to go into some other system, we can do that as well. So I'll do this like a cooking show. I'll start with creating a blank one, and then we'll go over and look at the one we actually built. So this is Nintex Workflow Cloud, all done in the web browser. You'll see workflow actions on the left-hand side, and then here we have the idea of a start event. So what I want to do here is a start event. You'll see I have all these different connectors, right? I can start when things happen in OneDrive. I can start when things happen in Dynamics CRM. I can start when things happen in Salesforce if you happen to be using Salesforce, or Box, or Zendesk, or Twilio. Or here I have, and the SharePoint Online ones will be coming here shortly. There'll be a connector for that. But I'm going to use a Nintex connector, and then I'm going to start with a form, right? So I can go ahead and click form. I can say, hey, I want this to be available on my mobile device, and then I start designing the form. Now, I mentioned this is, again, where Nintex fits in really well is, your citizen developers, low code, no code type of approach. So you're going to be able to do a lot, and you're not going to immediately have to jump into, .layer1 something in the scripting. Which, again, if you're a developer, or you're on the more advanced end of doing scripting languages and development, there's tools out there to do that. Again, Power Apps is one of them. But for something like this, where we want to get running quick and easy and build out this form and put it on our website, we can start doing that, again, using all drag and drop. So here on the left-hand side, these are all of our different form controls that we can use to build out our form. So we would start with we have text, either short or long. So this is basically like a single line of text or a multiple line of text. So I can drag this out here, put it on the canvas. This would be like, we could use that for my first name, and then I'll put that over here for my last name. And then if we wanted to do email, put that in there. I think we had a signature block in there somewhere. So again, you can just start building this out, very visually, so it starts to match the form that we had. Again, we're going to put the address in there. I could do either another short line of text right here, do the address. What else? We had a year of refund, right? So this would be our choice field, and year of refund would be a single choice. So I could put that in here. And again, if I click on any of these controls, flying in from the right-hand side is what we need to build out that particular particular control. So here we'll call this year. 2014, how about 2015, how about 2016? Probably went back too far. Oops. 2017. I'll make sure I didn't mute myself. And you can see, again, instant feedback is, again, being a contemporary form designer, you get all this right away. All right, you can set it to be horizontal, vertical. I can do radio buttons. I want to do a drop-down list, and now we have it in here. And then down below, I can show please select. Right, so now that shows up and turn that on and off. I can make it required if I want to. I can make it read-only if I want to, and then I can shrink it or make it bigger if I want to do that. So again, real easy. Now I have my year of refund. Let me go ahead and click off of that. And if I go into preview mode, you can see, boom, there's my drop-down list. And again, this will be fully responsive. So once I publish it, it'll resize accordingly. I can work with things like styles and colors. Again, and we're trying to make this so that you don't, the first step to making this work for you is that you don't have to build out a custom style sheet and do all of that. Is we give you some colors, you can then go in and pick your own. Again, we want to make this as easy as possible to get you up and running and building out these forms. So let me go ahead and close this again. I want to show you kind of from scratch. And I'll go back to the other one here. Let's go back to the designer. So there's a question, is the signature section the new Nintex sign that was added to the platform? It is not, but I will talk about Nintex sign in a second. But it is not, it's not a form control. It's actually a cloud service that we provide that would take a whole document and send it for signature. And Tom's question, so this particular example that I'm showing you, this data is all stored in the workflow. And it's not written right away back to SharePoint. Now, I can show you, and I'm going to show you in a second, how we can build this out in SharePoint, and the data will go from a public-facing form back into a SharePoint on-premise list. So we can do it both ways. Yep. So again, a lot of flexibility here. I'm trying to keep it as straightforward as possible. So let's go ahead and continue out of this. And we will close this. Again, I'm not going to save it. And we're going to close this. So let's go back to the one that we actually built here. So here's our property tax refund. So this is the fully built out workflow that we have that's going through the whole process. So, and this will go back to Tom's point. So again, we had a start event, we had a form, and you can see once we built out our form, if we would have done this in the other designer, excuse me, it's going to create workflow variables for all of our, from all the fields in our form. So they're going to be stored here in the workflow, right? So you can see them, we have our name, our account number, our property tax address. These are all from the start event in the form, and now we have access to use those anywhere we want in the workflow. Matter of fact, as the workflow goes on, we're going to have additional variables that exist in the workflow. So in our case, this is all of our form data. I hit close, and then you can see here as the workflow goes on. And we're not going to spend a ton of time on workflow, but I should highlight that we're able to take that data and write it out to a case management system. It could be Dynamics, it could be Salesforce, etc. Or more likely, we want to run it out to a SharePoint, right? So we can write it out to a SharePoint list item. So we can create an item in a SharePoint list. We put in a connection to our O365 environment. We can take this form and it'll write it back to SharePoint Online. So again, really easy to use and kind of build the kind of the public-facing interface for it. Now, a couple other things to highlight here. We'll go ahead and delete this. Is it's going to go through, and I did highlight the, once we're going to assign tasks. Oops, where's my branch by stage? The idea that when you are assigning someone a task, now this works the exact same way in SharePoint on-premise, all our versions where you have workflow and forms. It works in Office 365 and it works here in the Workflow Cloud, is when you're assigning somebody something to do, you want to be able to control that experience. So here in the assign a task, this is where you're going to assign them a task, but you'll notice here we have the ability to edit the form. And again, it's going to seamlessly pull up the designer. And what I have here is, this is where it's going to go to somebody at the county to review. Now, these fields like tax account number, case number, year of refund, amount of refund, you notice here I have these set as read only, right? Because we don't want Shannon Tillman, who works at Harrington County, to actually be able to modify those. We just want her to look at the information that was provided and either approve and reject it and put comments in there. So again, this is a super simplified example, but imagine again, we see a lot of our customers that use this for acquisition management, doing POs and things like that. Is, so I submit a request that I want to buy a new laptop, or I want to buy a Surface or a Surface Studio, and I got to put in all this information. Then it goes to finance. Finance maybe wants to see some of that initial information that was provided as read-only, but maybe they have to provide a bunch of additional information. So this form would actually be, in reality, could be much, much bigger. It could have things like, multiple pages, right? So multi-page forms is something easy to do here, where I could set up, multiple pages, and then I could go from page 1 to page 2 to page 3 and set it all up that way. So again, task forms is an important part of the whole form stack piece, because not only is it the initiator who's filling it out, which in this case is an anonymous user, but at some point when it's going internally, I want to control what their user experience looks like. So I'm going to close that. I'm certainly not going to publish it. I'm just going to scroll up. There we go. Yep, continue. Okay. Now, the other thing here too, and again, this is where I'm going to highlight mobile a little bit, is this form, right? This form that we created as an assign a task, and we send an email out. If I go over here, I apologize, I'm bouncing around a little bit. I'm going to go back over here to my other browser and go into a webmail account I have. And Shannon Tillman, who works for Harrington County, received an email. Again, this email was all built out in Nintex, and then you click on, you can see here, there's the form that we filled out, and then I can click on this, and this shows that form I just showed you. This, what we call this a task form. Okay, and this we can approve or reject that. Okay, now the other thing to highlight is, in this particular case, I went into webmail and clicked on the link, but what I could also do is I mentioned the idea of mobile, right? And the idea of mobile is, you know, this can be a responsive form, right? So if I resize my browser, you can see it's going to stack up my fields and going to do that automatically. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to do anything special for that. Nintex takes care of all that for you. But the other aspect of mobile is not just the browser, but is the idea of our mobile application, which is the ability to authenticate, right? And this would be to your SharePoint environment, whether it be on premises, whether it be on Office 365, or in this case in the workflow cloud. You authenticate across any of those systems, and you would get all of the workflow tasks of the things that were assigned to you. So let me go ahead and show that real quick. My technology all cooperates. I should be able to mirror my screen. Again, this will be real quick. Okay, just quick, make sure everybody's seeing this is really my iPad here. I know it doesn't have a frame on it, but I'm reflecting out my iPad. A bit visible?
Looks good.
All right, great. So again, responsive form, you can see here's the start form, but what I wanted to highlight was, you'll see I have a Harrington County mobile app that I built with our, what we call App Studio, right? So I'm able to build this. I can tie it in. Again, you can hard code it so it points at your SharePoint on-prem instance of SharePoint. You can point it to your Office 365 tenant, or in this case here, we're using the cloud product. So again, this works the same across the board, and it gives me access to all the forms that I've built with Nintex, right? And this would be, if I wanted to fill out a new form, I could do that here. And this would be in the mobile device, and I'm authenticated as Shannon Tillman, so it would know that when it goes back into my SharePoint list, it's going to create a new item in that SharePoint list and say Shannon Tillman filled it out. But again, going back to highlight the idea of tasks, is when Shannon received that task, it added it to her task list here, and she would get notified through a push notification, and I click on it, and it will pop up here, and she'll be able to fill it out. Right. So again, it works nicely in the mobile app itself. Right. And you don't have to write any code to build and publish an app. Right. You use our App Studio. All it is basically white labeling our mobile app, putting in the right colors, putting in the right logo, and then it actually creates the deployment package for you that you can roll out with a MDM solution like in Intune or whatever you happen to use, or you can just email people links to the app and they can download it and install it on their device, however you want. And again, makes it real easy if you wanted to build, in this case, a Harrington County app that has forms and has tasks in it. The question from Jeff, are the forms embedded by an iframe onto the page? That public-facing form that I showed you, yes, that was just a WordPress site that I had, and I just put the form in there. But when you publish it, you get a short, like a bit.ly URL for the public-facing forms that you can then drop in there. So let me go ahead and a couple quick other things about mobile. Again, if there's any interest in mobile forms, when you put it in the mobile application, let's see what I have here. You can actually start using things native to the device. So it has like barcode scanning, or you can use the camera to take pictures and annotate the pictures. So we've got some, local departments of transportation that use Nintex Mobile and these forms that you're able to build out to track potholes, right? So when people are in the field and maybe they don't have internet connectivity or have spotty internet connectivity, they'll find a pothole, they'll grab the geolocation off the device, or they'll take a picture, put in the address, and then that'll create a task where somebody needs to go out and fill the pothole or track graffiti or things like that. So, any type of field type of work where you maybe need to work offline is a great fit for again, for Nintex Mobile. I guess I should have turned off my my mobile alerts. Okay. All right. So let's look at. I'm going to pause there for a second, see if there's any questions, and I'm going to jump into SharePoint 2016 and show kind of the same type of things. Okay. All right. So again, this is a. Actually, this is 2013, I think. Tom's question: the signature field is what type? In the cloud product, it is actually an image that we use as like an image object that we can use and store it that way. If you wanted to have a more official signature, you could use the Nintex sign, which is essentially Adobe sign, or you could use DocuSign if you're already a DocuSign customer. But that's not signing on the form. That would take the form data, build the document, and then email it for signature. Oh, good. That's a good question. Is it saved into the SharePoint as an attachment? So the way this would work, so again, I've jumped over here to my SharePoint on-prem environment. So what that would do is it would store the signature as part of the as an image, as part, and I don't believe it goes into the attachment field itself, but it goes into the XML of the form. So there is a way, and there's an article I can send you if you're interested in it on how to extract that if you need to just grab that signature field. There's certainly a way to do it. But it does not add it to the attachment field. Now, you could put attachments in, of course, those would go right into the attachment field, but the signature itself, it's stored as an image object within the in the XML. Okay, so here again, I jumped over to SharePoint on-premise. This is again, this isn't Harrington County anymore. This is Cephalo Property Management, and I get into this because this is where we're going to get into maybe some more advanced use cases where you want to have some more dynamic forms. We covered public-facing forms. We covered task forms. So let's quickly look at, what we can do with your on-premise forms. Now I'm fully authenticated. I'm in here as DB Cooper. I can come in and fill out a new item. All right. So when I click New Item, this list in SharePoint already has a form built with Nintex that's attached to it. All right. And what this form does is it actually does a couple of things. Right. I can pick a series of drop downs. So I can pick Nevada. And what it's going to do is I'm going to fill out a contract or pick an applicant for a new property, and I want to get the latest and greatest rental values off of Zillow. Right. So here's the I pick Nevada, I pick Las Vegas, and then I've got a couple properties. Now these are all list lookups, or there might even be SQL queries inside of on the form. And then if I pick 1517 Wheatland Way, you'll see here it called out using a web service call. It called out to Zillow and returned the Zestimate for rent, which is $13.56, and then I have the ability over here to put in what I want this rent to be. And if I put in something pretty low, I think it'll give me an error. All right, yeah. So you can see here now we're using things like calculated values. So here the discrepancy is greater than 10%, so it's going to require senior level approval. All right, and if I go back here and say, hey, this is 1400, that'll make it. It says price discrepancy is 3.2%, and it doesn't violate a rule, so it's going to allow us to submit this form. And then I can go down here and use another lookup. This goes out to a SharePoint list, and it goes and looks at our applicants, and I can pick one of those and then hit submit, and that would kick off a workflow. We're also doing some other things in this particular form, and I'll open the designer in a second. But we're actually able to look at the existing user context and surface there, who the person is that's filling out the form, and what their agent ID is by looking up information off their user profile. So let's jump into this form in the designer again. So I started off by showing you the tool that we have for doing like nice public-facing forms. This is the same kind of user interface, but now this is right inside of SharePoint on premises, and I'm able to build this out. And then you're going to get more capability in here because again, this is living in our on-premises product. We have things where it's a little bit easier to do connections to SQL databases and web services and all the security that goes into those in an on-premise environment. So those are all going to live in here. But again, it's the same approach to what we saw, where it's going to drag and drop and put your information here on the canvas and start to build out your form. So I mentioned this is again more robust. If I come in here and look at my Zestimate, again, this is using a web service request. Again, I didn't build this. Again, this is where I would say this is above my my skill level with web services. This is why we rely on one of our more advanced users to come in here and say, all right, you want to query this web request, you're going to get back and do a get, you're going to get back some information, and then you're going to be able to XPath it to the actual amount, right? So you're going to pass in the property address, you're going to get back the amount, and then we're going to render it on the page. So this is where we can start to get into, again, more and more advanced type of capabilities in the form product. All right. The other thing we should look at here are rules. See if we have any rules on this page. Yeah, so we have this rule here, which is hide price discrepancy. And again, real easy rule builder. If the recommended price, I think, is null, then we're going to hide it. So if it calculates the value and ends up being null, then we're just going to hide this particular discrepancy field. If the discrepancy actually shows up as a particular value, then we'll show it as well. So real easy to hide and show values based on what happens, right? So if you want to pick from a list and then or have something that shows up only when a certain value is true, whether it's a typed in value or it's a drop down list value, you can hide and show whole panels of information on a form if you want to approach it that way. Okay. All right. Oh, look, I'm going to check the question. How does Nintex Forms handle SharePoint managed metadata columns? Great question. So if you look at the left here, right? So in the interest of time, I skipped over some of these. But if you look, these are the common controls that we saw in the cloud product, but we have some additional here with web requests. But we go into SharePoint, and you're going to see there's your managed metadata control, so that we can use it. We also have a change content type, right? So you can bind Nintex forms not just on SharePoint lists, but you can put them on document libraries. You can actually put them on document sets now, and have it be that form that you see when you're building out a document set. We also have list lookups, which are, again, if you've used the out-of-the-box list item forms, trying to do a cascading drop down. Not necessarily super easy. Our list lookup control, pretty easy to use. You can point it to a list, and then you can filter. See if this is a list lookup control. No, that's a SQL request. Let me just drag this onto the screen here. All right, so I can point this to a particular list, and it'll create me a drop down. But then when I go down here and I want to filter, I can filter based on another control's value. Right. So again, if I had a list of properties and a list of states, and I pick Nevada, then it's going to filter that accordingly. Now, in this example, we were using SQL, but we could use SQL. We could use SharePoint lists as well. So again, a lot of functionality, and you can see here I'm not doing a ton of code. The only thing outside of my no coder skills was the work that Dan had to do to build out that web service request. All right, so we're wrapping up on time here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over once again and show another example. This is where I want to kind of start talking about the contrast between what we can do and maybe where a Power Apps from Microsoft would pick up. So again, we're kind of using I'll say a building blocks approach here. Let me go back to my browser. All right, and I'm going to come over here. And I'm going to hop over to a SharePoint site. Now this is, let me find it. log me out. All right, bear with me 1 second. It got logged me out. All right, sorry about that. I had everything teed up. All right, so again, to wrap up today, then I want to look at a, what happened? I want to go in and look at, again, compare and contrast. This is now SharePoint Online, so this is our kind of our third version. Again, you'll see that they operate almost exactly the same. They're just, you know, where you're going to be using it is where, you know, you'll get, if you have SharePoint Online, use it for SharePoint Online. You have on-prem, use on-prem. So here, again, here's another SharePoint list. This is an event staff list, right? So this is if I looked at this, and this is one of the things I really like about our Forms product, the way we integrate in SharePoint, is you have an out-of-the-box list. Now, this is popping up here on the right-hand side, so this is more contemporary, modern UI in SharePoint. And here's all of my site columns. Now, in SharePoint, I can come in here, and I already have the Nintex apps installed. If I click on Nintex Forms, what that's going to do, and again, this is the same in on-prem, it's going to take all of those site columns. Use the classic designer this time. It's going to take all of those site columns that I have in SharePoint, and it's going to build me a form, right? It's going to take those, it's going to bind it to the appropriate field type, right? So if that field type is a date field, it's going to bind it to the date field. So I don't have to build this from scratch with a blank canvas. It's actually going to build it out for me. All right. So if I go to the designer, again, see, looks very, very similar to the other design interfaces we showed you. Here you can see it actually built out our form, right? So the status is a drop-down list. It built it as a choice field. It built that out accordingly. Same thing with estimated size. So I really, if I wanted to, I could hit publish, and now I would have an Nintex form that's a little bit more robust than my out-of-the-box forms. But in reality, again, I'm going to use the kind of the drag and drop nature of Nintex, and I'm going to start moving fields around on the canvas and building out the form the way I want. Or maybe I'm starting to put rules in there. But again, the idea here is I went into SharePoint, I built out my list. I went right in the list, and again, works the same on-prem and in the cloud. I'm able to click a Nintex Forms button. It's going to basically build me out a base form, and then all I need to go in and just modify it. And if I can come into any of these and I open it, it's going to show you, you know, here's the name, estimated size. It's connected to that site column. If there's a default value, I can put it in here. And again, I can do things with formatting and validation and all of that. So again, you don't have to go in and start from scratch. If you wanted to, it's certainly, you know, there's some people that like to do it. I can delete all of this, and over here on the left-hand side where it says list columns are all my columns. Again, I could drag them out one by one and build it from scratch. But I like to do things quickly, you know, so I build out my list, which is really easy to do these days. I can just boom, 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 put all my columns in and write column types once I'm sure my list is correct. I hit Nintex Forms, it's going to build my form for me. If I do need to add additional columns, I come in here. I don't have to leave the form designer. And I can come in here and I can add additional columns to it. Okay. It's pulling up the create a column. All right, I got another question coming in here. When a Nintex form is linked to a SharePoint list or library, what happens when a form user takes 2 or more photos? How does the SharePoint store those images as attachments? Yes, they come in as attachments. If you were using there's actually the attachment control on the form, and then you can use that, and that control you can limit how many they can provide. You can put a minimum, like if they have to provide at least one, you can put that in there as well. But those will come in, and then those will be stored in that attachment field. And on the mobile device, clicking the attachment, add attachment, it'll actually allow you to open up the camera and take a picture. Hopefully that was helpful. I don't know what's going on here with my environment. It is a SharePoint Online development account, so. All right. So again, to kind of compare and contrast, right? So this is, oops. So after submitting a form, will all the data display on the SharePoint sheet? Just like no, yes, absolutely. Now it is worth noting that, any of these fields that are bound back to a SharePoint list will go right into the SharePoint list directly, right? So as you see here, I have connected to, and this is connected to the title field. But I have the option of, if I wanted to add, right? We get into some scenarios like this. Let me move some things around here. Let's get rid of the logo here. Move this down. So I say yes because all these, in this particular case, all these controls right back to a column, and these all go in the same list item. However, if you wanted to do a repeating section, right, that'll work a little bit like InfoPath repeating sections, where this data is going to be stored unbound in the form, and then you would have to extract it with the workflow, right? So if this was an expense form and you wanted people to add multiple items and you wanted to do it using a repeating section, you could do that. It's just, it's not going to create multiple list items. You would have to use the workflow capability to do that. All right, so the next question is, can a form save to different destinations, such as different SharePoint lists? So what you would do is you would do the base, with the base information would save back to a list, but then you could use the workflow to write the information out to other lists if needed. And again, the example I used with a repeating section, if that needed to go out into a different list as individual line items related back to the master item, so you create almost like a parent-child relationship in lists, you do that, you just do it with the workflow. Right here, what the form is going to do is it's going to capture all the data and either write it back to the current list's site columns, or columns, or it's going to store it as XML in the form itself, which then you would need to extract. Okay, next question is, can you come back to a form that's been filled out, save to edit in Nintex, or do you have to edit in SharePoint? No, we do have a save and close, and when you come back, you can pick up where you left off. Now that is, let's see how we do that. I don't know if I have any in here to do that, but if I come in here, I think I can double click this. Yeah, so here under the button, I can create one that's save. I can click one that says save and continue, and I can say save and submit. So again, save, and again, you can fill it out and save it in progress. You can also cancel it, and you can also use JavaScript as well. And again, that's the one area with our Forms product too. And again, I do more damage with JavaScript. But if you're a more advanced user and you want to do some things with JavaScript and JSON on the forms, and that capability is available there to use. You can use jQuery libraries on the form, or you can even do things that actually do web service calls and stuff like that right on the form using JavaScript if you want to. Again, I don't typically mess around with that. That's again not my skill set as a non-coder, but depending on who you talk to, JavaScript is or isn't code, so it's fully supported in here as well. All right, to answer that question, all right, someone wants to know if your special pricing for the cloud version is still available. Special pricing, yeah, I mean, so we have all sorts of pricing available. Let me actually go back, and I'm available to stay on a little bit longer, but let me go back to one of my wrap-up slides. Again, I have no problem hanging around. I have this blocked till 1:30. But in case people need to drop, we show this first. So kind of wrap up, again, because we're right at the top of the hour, 5 after. There's not a singular replacement for InfoPath, right? You've got Power Apps out there from Microsoft, which certainly has a place. Again, you can do some more advanced things, particularly with JavaScript and data connection and building complete mobile applications that are completely self-contained mobile applications. No, like we said, no form is an island, right? We typically think of forms with a process behind it. I'd be happy to assist. If anybody has a form out there, I'm always looking for good state and local government examples of things to build. As you saw in Harrington County, those were all real examples for people that I built. So happy to help there. And again, we do have flexible pricing plans specifically for InfoPath migrations. So if you have a lot of forms, but maybe you don't have a ton of workflows, we have pricing plans available for that. So Lorna, hopefully that answered the question. But we have tons, and just reach out to me. Let's see, hopefully my contact information's on here. Oops. There we go. So steve.witt@nintex.com. My Twitter is SharePoint Lumberjack or SP Lumberjack. And again, I'm happy to help you kind of think through the process of building out any of these forms, take an InfoPath form, move it to the cloud. And again, we have all sorts of pricing options available. All right, so let's go back to the question. Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure that was up there. And this will be in the slide deck that I share out to everybody. All right, so let's see here. What does printing a filled out form look like? Okay, great question. Let's go back in, and again, we have options here. All right, so let's go into our back in here. Go to my cancel this, and we actually added this capability. So if I go into this property management example, maybe. All right, hopefully I didn't lose everybody. Oh, sorry. Oops, if I click on the right thing. All right, so here's the one that we have filled out with this agent was doing a form. It didn't select an applicant, but we added print to PDF capability, which will take everything, and you have control of this in the form designer where your page breaks are. Now this one is not, I don't believe it's going to hit a page break because it's kind of small, but it's going to convert this and everything as it appears right here on the form, it's going to convert it to a PDF. Right, so it's going to convert to a PDF that you can print out. You can also leverage our document generation capabilities to take all of that data from a form and build a document, and then save that as a PDF. You can even save it back to the list item if you wanted to, or you could save it to a document library with all the information in it. So that was actually, if I would have finished the example that we started with that property tax rebate form, it was going to finish that, and it was going to put all the information right there in a single document that we could store, and we could even just keep the list item information just there for reference, but actually have a document that we put into our record center and keep that long term. Okay. Be interested to know the major differences between Nintex and Power Apps. Okay, it's a great question. And I'm not a Power Apps expert, but I do have it kind of keyed up here in my environment, so I'll be happy to show it to you. I think for me as somebody who kind of early adopter of SharePoint Designer and being able to do things there with like the content query web part and the data view web part and things like that. Like again, that is about where my skill set caps out. So if I go back here again to my example where I clicked on this and built out an Nintex form, I can go in here and certainly automate and create this this form with Power Apps. Now what that's going to do is, you can see in here, there's already some data in here. When I build out a Power App, I can come over here and you'll see there's a sample event tracker. So what this is going to do, I'm just going to open this up and you're going to see I'm going to jump into another interface here. Right, what it's going to do is it's going to open essentially that whole SharePoint list as a modular little app, right? So this is, if I clicked on any of these, it's going to go into the list item detail. So it's a little bit different than just filling out the form. It's going to allow me to package up this app. But you notice this is, even though I'm here on a desktop view, it's showing me kind of the mobile view, right? Because that's one of the things that this does really well, is allows you to package this up so that you have, in this case, this is an event list for staff members that would go as a mobile app on their device that they would have access to that list data. If you wanted to make this available for offline, Nintex makes it a little bit easier, right? You don't have to do anything special here. There's some deployment package stuff that you need to do. It's certainly capable to work offline, but that's more of a kind of an app configuration thing you need to do to make it so you can deploy it out to mobile devices. But you'll notice here when I go into and add a new item here in Power Apps as a user, again, I'm still getting the mobile kind of view of it. It's not quite as responsive. But again, it's still completely usable. And where you're going to see Power Apps excel, and where some people use it, particularly if they have more complex InfoPath forms that are completely kind of standalone applications, is as we get into the designer. I should have the designer open here. All right, maybe not. All right, let's go ahead and edit Power Apps. And again, I think the big difference, Lorna, to answer your question, if you had to sum up one thing is, Nintex is kind of known for the ease of use. It's going to be more apt to be used by, the average user, your average SharePoint site owner type of thing. Power Apps, again, because it can build out these fully kind of end-to-end apps, and kind of they're a gateway to things like logic apps and other things that live in Azure. They're going to be typically used by a more advanced user, right? So if I come in here, and you can see here, this is the Power Apps Designer as compared to the Nintex Designer, just a little bit more what you would see out of I don't want to say Visual Studio because it's not quite that complex, but it's certainly more more complex than like the Nintex Workflow Designer, right? Where if I come in here and I click on an item and I want to work with it, I've got a lot of options, but I also have things up here where I'm going to have to start working with markup, or at least start working with more advanced capabilities to kind of do the same things. So that's kind of a brief kind of side-by-side comparison. Again, there's a place for both. It's not a one or the other. It's not Nintex or Power Apps. It's not Power Apps or Nintex. Some things are going to lend themselves really well to Nintex. Some things are going to lend themselves really well to the Power Apps. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay, great. So any other questions? Again, I kind of went through the closing up slides. I'll make the deck available to everybody, but hopefully this was helpful. Again, I try to cover a lot of material that covers everything from public-facing forms to workflow task forms to mobile forms to SharePoint list item forms, and ultimately with Power Apps. So hopefully this was good. I know it was recorded, so I can go back and watch it later. And again, if anybody wants to learn more, wants to have a more in-depth conversation, wants to talk to our kind of our technical team, again, I'm certainly not a technical developer type. I'd be happy to set something up. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Steve.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And again, I guess we're done.
All right.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Anyone have any last general SharePoint Office 365 questions? Well, we've got a few people left on this call. Thank you, Lorna. I think Steve stopped sharing his screen, but he's still on the call.
Oh, sorry, I'm back in. I just saw your note. Sorry. Was there a question?
Tom was typing up a question.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, it's tricky. The line, what I would say is Power Apps typically is more IT and IT dev, like DevOps, people that are more into kind of, it's tricky, right? So InfoPath people like end users, I'll say power users. To me, a power user is somebody who's comfortable creating a list or library, comfortable creating a workflow. You might have given them access to SharePoint Designer and InfoPath in the past. But at some point, when they want to do something more advanced, they need to go to somebody for help. That's where I would put Power Apps in. What we see with people using Power Apps is you don't end up with dozens of Power Apps out there. You'll do one or two more advanced. I don't even say advanced. It's more like when InfoPath was used to be a complete end-to-end app, all in that one structured document with tons of code behind and everything else, and it doesn't make sense to put it into break it out into a workflow. That's where people I see using Power Apps. So I wouldn't exactly say that Power Apps is power user, because Nintex is, again, anyone from the business through IT uses it. I think there's a faction out there in IT that would sometimes use Power Apps for certain things and sometimes use Nintex for certain things. So hopefully that helps. It's tricky because, again, it's room for everybody. It's not one size fits all. And again, in the on-premise SharePoint world, there's not a ton of I think they keep talking about it, but there's no, at least not in like 2016. 2013, there's no way to run Power Apps, right? So I heard that's coming, but it's still a cloud solution. So again, Nintex, you can do some of the more advanced things there, but again, you're going to get into JavaScript just like you would with Power Apps. Okay. All right, I won't be so quick to jump this time. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for you guys that hung on, and Joe and Lorna and everybody. Thanks for hosting.
Thanks so much for being on the call.
Of course. Talk soon. All right, bye-bye.
Yep. Well, folks, unless there's any other questions, I'm probably going to hop off. All right, everybody. I'll talk to you all later. Quick pitch for everyone on the call, too, if anyone wants to speak at a future meeting. Oops, looks like Tiffany, you're the only one left. Hey, if you ever want to speak at our group, please reach out to us. We'll happily provide you a spot. And she's gone, too. Okay. Bye, everybody.